at the annual economic survey of the central bank for 2020. And I am seeing under an item in table 14 called primary debt security activity. First Citizens Investment Services Limited borrowing $200 million. I go down further. I see First Citizens Bank borrowing $623 million, the equivalent of 92.36 million US dollars. When we turn the same page, table 14, we see First Citizens Investment Services Limited, FCIS, borrowing $25 million US dollars, equivalent to 169 at a rate of 2.15% over a year. That is the period of time. I want to ask the First Citizens Bank and the First Citizens Investment Company, are you borrowing money at this rate of interest I have mentioned to lend to Cornerstone? This is what we are seeing here. You seem to be borrowing money at a certain rate of interest to lend to Cornerstone, who is your competitor. And Dave, what is even more alarming, we own 7.4% of the shares of Barita Investment Limited, and we don't even have one director on that company board of directors. We loan $85 million US dollars to this company called Cornerstone Financial Holdings Limited, and we don't even have a director on this company's board to look after our interests. So what is going on? These are some of the concerns that we have involving this loan to this company called Cornerstone Investment. And I want to tell you, Dave, it becomes curiouser and curiouser, like Alice in Wonderland. We have all seen, and it is connected to this loan. FCB has issued an APO. This APO is equivalent to 11 million shares or equivalent. With that sale of shares of 11 million shares, the government ownership will drop to 60% from 65%. But you know what is interesting? What is interesting is the priority of allocation of those shares. Under the leadership of the former Prime Minister, Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, we issued what is called an IPO in 2013, when we took a policy decision to allow the citizens of this country to own their shares in the First Citizens Bank. And we put onto the public market 48.9 million shares. But there was a priority, Dave. And let me just read for the record. It says, if the offer is oversubscribed, consistent with the government's policy of promoting the widest possible participation in share ownership, priority to receive the allocation applied for up to the limits noted shall be given as follows in descending order of priority. Look at the order of priority that the People's Partnership under the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar pursued as a government policy for the widest possible participation in share ownership by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Employees of the issuer, that is the First Citizens Bank, 15% of the shares would go to them. Individual investors who are nationals, take note, nationals of Trinidad and Tobago, 15%. Registered pension and other trust funds, credit unions and cooperatives, 25%. That is in Trinidad and Tobago. Registered mutual funds, including the Trinidad and Tobago Unit Trust Corporation, 25%. The National Insurance Board, 10%. And companies registered in Trinidad and Tobago and other investors such as the Commonwealth Development Corporation and the Caribbean Investment Fund, 10%. That was the priority listing for the allocation of shares. Fast forward to 2022. What are we seeing in 2022? Dave? Here was the government, without announcing any change of policy to this country, here what the government has done. The government new priority allocation table is as follows. Employee share ownership plan. That is a company plan. They buy shares on behalf of the company and the workers will benefit, 5%. Where are the individual workers? If I work at FCB and I want to buy shares, where do I feature? Nothing for the FCB workers. It goes on. Listen, individual investors, not from Trinidad and Tobago, just individual investors. They could come from Mars, they could come from Poland, they could come from the United States, they could come from England. Individual investors, 55%. 55%. So you and I and anyone else who want to buy shares in this bucket have to compete with the whole of CARICOM, whether you're from Jamaica, Guyana, St. Vincent, Grenada. And then we have to compete with people from the United States and England and Canada. Is that consistent with the widest participation of share ownership? If the government policy has changed, the government has a duty to tell the country. Registered mutual funds, including Trinidad and Tobago Unit Trust Corporation, 10%. Registered pension and other trust funds, credit union and cooperative and national enterprises limited, 15%. NIB under us, it was just NIB, 10%. Under this government, NIB, TT, and other national insurance scheme of other countries. So the NIB for this 10% has to compete with other national insurance companies or boards registered in other countries. Be you in Bahamas, be you in Jamaica, be you in Barbados, be you in Grenada, be you in Canada, be you in Poland, be you in London. Because they say other countries. They didn't say CARICOM. And then they say other companies. Under our 2013, it was other registered companies in Trinidad and Tobago. Here, it is other companies, and that's it. Other companies. I raise this here to show you, Dave, that in the definition section, they introduced this new concept called non-public company. And they say a company that is not listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange or other regulatory stock exchange wherever situated as a public company. So it means it's a Cornerstone Financial. It's not a public company. It's not listed on the Jamaican Stock Exchange. Can now enter the Trinidad and Tobago capital market and buy shares. This is what this government has done. So we are calling on the government today. We are asking the government of this country to declare its hands on this matter. Dave, I was shocked when I read in today's papers. Look at it. Share in our success. Share in our success. This is in today's papers. When you open this and you read, you are seeing something that is not seen in the prospectus that we have a copy of. Hear what they are saying in this thing. who can buy First Citizen shares? Hear what it says. The ordinary shares are being offered to individual investors, institutional investors, NIB, registered mutual funds, Trinidad and Tobago Unit Trust Corporation, pension, another trust fund, credit union, and other cooperatives. That is what you see here. But when you go to this part of a document that we have received here, this was in the newspapers yesterday. You have something called non-nationals. I want to read this for members of the public. Non-nationals of Trinidad and Tobago need to provide full color notarized copies of the two forms of valid government issued photo identification: national ID card or passport or driver's permit with birth certificate, notarized copies of proof of address, proof of income, and local bank account number must be provided along with bank reference. Look here. We have a prospectus here. And nowhere in this prospectus are we told about non-nationals. So the prospectus needs to be corrected. There needs to be a category called non-nationals. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago must tell Trinidad and Tobago whether portfolio investment from foreign investors in the securities market is now permissible. Can foreigners now own our banks? Can foreigners now own our insurance companies? This is what the Black Power Revolution was about in 1970. Our banks must be owned by the citizens of our country. Our insurance companies must be owned by the citizens. And even if we have CARICOM nationals coming in to own banks and our insurance companies, we must have a certain degree of interest in those companies so that the national interest will not be compromised. So we are calling on Minister Imbert and the Prime Minister and Minister Stuart Young. Would you believe that NCB Merchant Bank is advertising our FCB shares directly on the Jamaican market to encourage Jamaicans to buy First Citizens Bank shares? NCB Merchant Bank. Nobody was told by FCB, nobody was told by the Minister of Finance that non-nationals will have to compete with citizens of this country. Companies that are owned and registered by Trinidadians and Tobagonians will now have to compete with companies coming from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. The NIB will have to compete with other NIB registered in other countries to buy our shares, our FCB shares. We call on the Minister of Finance to tell this country what is the policy, what is the government's policy as it relates to share ownership of our national assets. And in this instance, the national asset that is in question is the First Citizens Bank. Can non-nationals from CARICOM buy shares into First Citizens? We need answers. Can Canadians, can Britons, can the United States, can Americans, can Canadians buy shares into the First Citizens Bank? These are areas that the government needs to clear up for the people of this country. And why do you have nationals? Nationals who own First Citizens Bank competing pari passu with others. This cannot be fair. So we call on them to clear the air on this matter. I will now take the opportunity to turn over the meeting to my colleague, Honorable Dave Tanko, who will address you at this time.
Thank you, Senator Mark. I'm certain that citizens looking on must now be extremely concerned about the state, not just about the banking sector, but of the state of lack of transparency that currently pervades Trinidad and Tobago and the operations of this government. Perhaps that is why Trinidad and Tobago's economy is in freefall. After 7 years, the economy continues to be in crisis, having contracted by more than 20% before COVID due to the mismanagement and incompetence of the government. And the economy continues to be battered by the crisis of confidence in the actions, statements, policies, and directions of this government. The international rating agencies Moody's Investor Services and Standard & Poor's Global Rating Services have continuously downgraded the government over the last 7 years, including their recent assessment for last year. This means that international investors seeking a place to invest money in business opportunity, foreign direct investment that we so desperately need as a country, are being told by these agencies that this country has, under this government, has serious significant challenges in meeting its debt obligations. Under the hand of this Minister of Finance as well, Trinidad and Tobago continues to experience a collapse in the ease of doing business, making this country even less attractive to domestic and foreign investors. The most recent available data puts central government debt outstanding as at March and April 2022 at over 109 billion TT dollars. This is the height it has ever been in our history. Worse than that is that the foreign debt component, that is the debt we have to repay in foreign exchange, has now grown from 17.8% as it was in December 2015 to 30% as of 2 months ago. This government has been burning up foreign exchange at an unprecedented rate, but has been creating no capacity to generate new sources of revenue, new sources of foreign exchange. And so they have effectively been propping up the exchange rate holdings by borrowing and withdrawals from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. This is simply not sustainable. Worse than that, we have been told, as Senator Mark just referenced, we have been told that a significant amount of our foreign exchange is being channeled outside of Trinidad and Tobago into investments that require substantial investigation and transparency and reporting by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which they have failed to do. Our economy is in free fall, but the economy is not just about business and investment and foreign exchange and national debt. The government's role, any government's role in managing the economy of a country, is to create the environment for sustainability, to create the environment for stimulation of domestic and foreign investment, to develop a sense of confidence in the investing population for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, for the benefit of our country. Economics and the economy then is not about numbers, it's about people. Governance is not about giving contracts to friends, family, and financiers. The economy, government expenditure, government revenue is all about people. It's all about the taxpayers. It's all about the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. It's about creating jobs for the population and creating the environment for the creation of those jobs by the private sector. It's about encouraging small and medium-sized businesses and the development of an entrepreneurial class. It's about providing food at affordable prices, a health sector that works and is responsive to the needs of the population so that people do not have to wait for months and years for emergency heart surgery, cataract surgery, or for treatment of cancer. It is about ensuring that people feel safe, that they are not afraid to walk down to the supermarkets or to the nearby Chinese grocery or the Chinese restaurant or to sit in their yard because they are afraid of being robbed, assaulted, or killed in the process. It's about providing the infrastructure so that citizens do not have to fear whenever rain falls in this tropical country because the government has failed to clear the water courses, the drains, and the rivers of Trinidad and Tobago. 2 years ago, the central bank published an article which highlighted the growing crisis of confidence that has been developing, and it cautioned at that point in time, that is 2020, that the confidence of economic actors in Trinidad and Tobago was at its all-time worst. Instead of frontally confronting those issues and working with stakeholders to find solutions, we have witnessed the establishment of a government policy of secrecy, misinformation, distractions, and public relations gimmickry. The government is actually open about that. The Prime Minister, our Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, publicly boasted about the mafia code of Cosa Nostra, warning the public about how PNM government would treat with whistleblowers and persons who dared to question transactions, who dared to speak out against corruption and mismanagement. And we saw that in a letter that Senator Mark just raised, where the Minister of Finance chose to pick fun, chose to target Senator Mark instead of answering the questions which were legitimately raised. But it goes further. For more than 7 years, this government has sat on procurement legislation. Legislation designed to identify and prosecute persons and companies involved in corruption in the award of state contracts. They have sat on that legislation even while they have spent over $350 billion of taxpayers' money. Even when the legislation was passed by the Parliament, and before the law was even implemented, the government came back to the Parliament to remove billions of dollars in contracts and financial transactions from being examined by the Office of the Procurement Regulator. So they set up the office, they set up the infrastructure, they set up the legislation, but they took out parts of it even before the legislation was put in place and implemented. But it gets worse. Last year, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago sat for long hours and several sittings to debate and pass the long-awaited regulations to give full effect to this legislation, this procurement legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know that up to now, those regulations have not been put in place, but the government continues to award billions of dollars in contracts annually with no accountability and no transparency? A few years ago, the same procurement regulator told this country that every year an average of 5.2 billion TT dollars is lost because of the government's refusal to put the procurement legislation in place. That works out to about $36.4 billion taken from the taxpayers' pockets, taken from money that taxpayers have put into the government's hands, taken from possible use to fix roads, to buy hospital equipment, to service loans, to feed children, to invest in agriculture. $36.4 billion have been extracted from the economy and put into questionable business practice with a lack of accountability and what is clearly money is lost to corruption under this government with nothing to show for it. We asked the Minister of Finance, why the delay? Why the delay? Why up to today we still do not have procurement legislation designed to prevent corruption? Why up to today? More than that, who are the beneficiaries of this $36.4 billion over the last 7 years under this government? Who are they? Who are the persons and companies living like parasites off the blood of taxpayers of this country? And why is the government so committed to protect those citizens that they refuse to implement the legislation? It is ironic but so real that a recent statement by one religious leader described it best as a cancer of corruption. And he noted as well that this has significant impact on the population of Trinidad and Tobago. And why, ladies and gentlemen, is this procurement legislation and the loss of $36.4 billion over the last 7 years, why is that so important? Last week, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago presented its findings of the National Financial Literacy Survey Report. Now, one newspaper article reported that half of the people surveyed were living paycheck to paycheck. I refer you to the headline of this Sunday Guardian report that says clearly, Central Bank survey finds many living paycheck to paycheck. Now that's fortunate if you have a paycheck, but we also know that many are living through the grace of God, because many citizens are currently unemployed. The statistics show that. The same report also said that 1 in every 3 persons were of the view that they were living in too much debt and had no money left at the end of the month to save or to engage in expenditure or to plan for expenditure in the future, in the following month. More than that, amongst businesses surveyed, it was revealed that more than half of the business persons have a negative sentiment about the state of the economy in the last 5 years. That is a crisis of confidence, and that is why we have seen the economy collapse. That is why we have seen very little investors, very little investment. That is why we have seen a collapse of the small and medium-sized business sector, because persons have very little confidence in the economy as managed by this Minister of Finance. The same survey also reported that a substantial number of persons in this country were unable to cover basic living expenses, and that those who could not borrow or who did not borrow have to cut down on expenditure or draw down on their savings or do without. But we didn't need Central Bank to tell us all of that. We who live in the real world are absolutely aware that there's a crisis of magnanimous proportions facing citizens, the majority of citizens in this country. It is real that citizens are living in a state, many of them literally unable to put food on the table for their families, for their children, and unable further to even afford transportation to take their children to school. What is worse is that recently we have started seeing reports of higher and increasing food prices. Yesterday's newspaper headline: pricey produce, food prices, locally produced in particular food prices have started to escalate. Vegetable costs are going up. Farmers are blaming fertilizer shortage. Vendors are saying consumers will feel the pinch. Ironically, it is not today that the government knew that food prices were going to increase. It is not today that they knew that shipping costs had increases. It is not today that they knew that the price of food sourced from international suppliers was going to increase drastically and dramatically. But yet, today, pensioners and ordinary citizens are forced to pay as much as 20 and 25% more for food than they did just 3 years ago. Gas has gone up, the cost of medicine has gone up, healthcare has gone up, the cost of everything has gone up, and yet this government offers to workers 0.01%. 0.01%. This government understands and accepts the fact and the truth of the fact that prices and the cost of living has gone up substantially. They accept that the value of salaries have dropped as a result. The purchasing power has collapsed, and yet they treat with workers as if workers have no value. That is a sin of magnanimous proportions. In fact, even the central bank has recognized that the purchasing power of the TT dollar has dropped so substantially that they are now increasing the amount of polymer $100 bills in circulation, likely because they recognize that because of the increased cost of living, we need more money to buy the same amount of food that we once used. The difficulty now is that citizens no longer have access to more revenue. So ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, why are we in this crisis? The government knew for months and months and years ago that these crises were coming. There were international predictions of higher world food prices that would come to Trinidad and Tobago. There were international predictions that local bodies must now increase food production. It is not now that the government has known that. They have known that for years. But they have failed or refused to do anything about it. Ask yourself why, ladies and gentlemen. Ironically, for the last 2 years, during the most challenging times of COVID in our country, our farmers, Trinidad and Tobago farmers, kept this country supplied with fresh, locally produced food on a continuous basis. Today, those very same farmers are confronted by increased pre-year larceny, vastly higher input costs, flooding, home invasions, poor infrastructure, and worst of all, an uncaring government. While that is happening, while this government has abandoned the food sector, while they have abandoned the farmers in Trinidad and Tobago, we note that the value of food imports has gone up. Now, you can't import food without foreign exchange. So who is getting that foreign exchange? And is it likely that food that can be produced locally is being imported from outside of Trinidad and Tobago? Clearly, some large godfather is benefiting from a substantial allocation of foreign exchange, so much so that they could compete with the local food being produced by farmers in Trinidad and Tobago. It is ironic that in October 2020, the Minister of Finance boasted that he had created a fund within his ministry with $500 million for the sole purpose of providing fiscal incentives to stimulate agricultural development. Now that is outside and in excess of the money allocated on an annual basis to the Ministry of Agriculture. $500 million put in a fund. During that very fiscal year, $470 million remained unutilized, with the rest of it having been used to pay for one-off food hampers. Last year, the minister gave himself another $300 million to add to the same fund. That means that the minister is basically sitting on $770 million while we experience a food crisis, a crisis of epic proportions of rising food prices in this country. The minister is sitting on the money allocated allegedly for stimulating agricultural development. The fiscal year is almost over, and we still have farmers pleading for some sort of assistance to bring down the cost of inputs and for infrastructure so that they can play their part effectively in providing affordable food population to Trinidad and Tobago. But while the farmers are willing and anxious to play their part, as they have always been doing, this government continues to demonstrate that it simply does not care about the plight of average citizens. In fact, the attitude continues to be that citizens are doing exceptionally well. That is the attitude, that is the message that ministers in this government is telling the world. We've had that comment being made on an international program by the minister in the office of the Prime Minister, the Minister of Energy and everything else, where he said that Trinidadians, 1.4 million Trinidadians are doing very well. This government is so far isolated from the realities facing citizens that they are not likely to seek to address any of the concerns facing you because they simply do not believe that those concerns are real. They simply do not believe that those concerns exist. They simply do not think that crime is a crisis, that high food prices is a crisis, that the health sector is a crisis, that our energy sector is a crisis, that transportation is in crisis. They simply do not believe that national security is a major concern and a crisis. That is why they have been stemming and hemming and hawing with the procurement of pepper spray. This government simply does not believe that crises which face the average citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are real. And if they do not believe that they are real, they will do nothing to fix it. And that is where we are in a crisis today. That is why we are in the crisis we are in today, Senator. That is why we are in the crisis today, because the government is so far removed from reality that they do not accept that these crises facing Trinidad and Tobago, facing average citizens, are real. Let me give you an example. The role of the Ministry of Agriculture is paramount in ensuring that our food security and food safety as a country is in place, especially coming out of the pandemic, especially facing the international higher prices for food. So why then would the Prime Minister put a minister to head this critical ministry who has absolutely no experience in agriculture, food production, agronomy, or the food industry in general? Why would a Prime Minister pick a minister and put him as a Minister of Agriculture who has never planted a pepper plant in his life? It is the same as has been done with the Ministry of Local Government, where the Prime Minister has again placed a minister with no experience and expertise in this sector. It is the same with the Ministry of National Security. It is the same with the Ministry of Works and Transport, and the list goes on and on and on. In every case where the impact is on the average citizen, the minister has chosen people who are simply square pegs in round holes, unsuited for the job for which they have been put, unsuited for the responsibilities for which they have been given, and the taxpayers are being asked repeatedly and increasingly to bear the cost of this folly. For the last few years, taxpayers have been forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars a month to pay a special advisor on agriculture in the office of the Prime Minister. We have been paying tens of thousands of dollars to pay a special advisor on agriculture in the office of the Prime Minister. That gentleman was brought up from abroad to occupy that position. And what have we gotten to show for that? The agricultural sector has been targeted for collapse by this government to facilitate big business. Ladies and gentlemen, this country is in free fall. Our population of Trinidad and Tobago is in free fall. The problems are known. Billions are being spent and billions are being stolen by corruption under this government. And the citizens have nothing to show for it except pain and suffering. In fact, the government continues to add heavier burdens on the back of an already stressed population through property tax, increased rates for water and electricity, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to stop the corruption. Implement the procurement legislation now. Implement it now. Allow the procurement regulator the teeth to do the job, to bring to bear, to bring to account, to bring back the $36.4 billion stolen from the taxpayers of this country under this government. It is time for this government to take the agricultural sector seriously and invest in modernizing and equipping our farmers and our fishermen with the technology and support they need. It is long past time for this government to stop playing petty politics, to stop playing petty politics and musical chairs and do the job that taxpayers are paying them to do. Either they get on board and do the job that we expect them to do, that we are paying them to do and paying handsomely, or they resign and move on. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the opportunity to present on behalf of the wider population, and on behalf of my colleague Senator Mark, some of the critical issues facing Trinidad and Tobago. I am sure you agree with me, I am sure you agree with us, that there's an absence of transparency and a cloak of secrecy on everything this government does. And the reason for that is because the government does not want to accept, they do not want you to know about the cancer of corruption as referenced by a religious leader in Trinidad and Tobago. If there are any questions, we will be both willing to take your questions. Now, I turn it over to our moderator.
We have some questions coming through WhatsApp. Firstly, Senator Mark, do you think that First Citizens Bank has an obligation to make the names of the directors of Cornerstone Financial known to the public?
I would say that because of the nature of this transaction, because Cornerstone Financial Holdings Limited is an offshore registered company, and because we have loaned that particular company, when I say we, the citizens who own FCB have loaned that company some 85 million US dollars, I think it is incumbent in this prospectus, they ought to provide us with some more information on the risks that the country faces as a result of this particular loan to this company, and without any hard assets being held in the form of collateral. I think the government of the country, the Minister of Finance, as corporation sole, has a duty and a responsibility to ensure that the names of these shareholders, the names of these directors are made public. The First Citizens Bank management and its directors, it appears to us, are dancing to the drumbeat of the government. That is why it is important for the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries to tell this country what role are they playing in this whole scenario involving Cornerstone Financial Holdings Limited and the First Citizens Bank. The First Citizens Bank cannot be taking these decisions on their own. Somebody is behind those decisions, and the government owes a duty to this country to let us know who are behind these particular moves on the part of the First Citizens Bank in the context of the Cornerstone Financial Holdings Limited. So yes, the government must make those names public.
If I may join in as well, Senator, the fact is that while the business community in Trinidad and Tobago, small and medium-sized businesses, are unable to, and regular citizens are unable to get access to foreign exchange, there's a parallel market that has now been developed because of the failure and the inability of citizens and businesses seeking to invest in Trinidad and Tobago, their inability to access foreign exchange without having to pay premium prices and accessed by the black market. That exemplifies and highlights the need for even greater transparency, because somehow this entity that does not operate in Trinidad and Tobago has a priority in getting foreign exchange from Trinidad and Tobago. Something is drastically wrong with that. Why this government refuses to explain where foreign exchange goes and how it goes is grave cause for concern, especially since, as I said, investors in this country who are seeking to retool, who are seeking to invest in their own businesses to operate in this country, have difficulty in getting foreign exchange. But for foreigners, you would recall several years ago that a toilet paper company, foreign-based toilet paper company, was able to get foreign exchange in this country, but locals cannot. Therefore, I agree with you. There's a need for substantial transparency, Senator, in the use of foreign exchange in particular, but in this particular transaction, and there may be more that we yet have not been seeing. That is why transparency is such a critical factor. That's why procurement legislation is such a critical factor. That's why the minister must be held to account.
Another question. Senator Mark, we know that Minister David represents corporations, but is he, having been so vocal on this issue regarding Cornerstone, while we have heard little from FCB themselves, do you feel that he has perhaps giving the impression that the Ministry of Finance is dictating this transaction to the bank?
Good question.
What I would say is this. There appears to be a close linkage between decisions being taken at the First Citizens Bank, and in particular as it relates to this institution or company called Cornerstone Financial Holdings Limited, and institutions and individuals associated with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. This is why I made a point earlier that I was a bit surprised to see that NCB Merchant Bank was advertising in the Jamaican market for Jamaicans to access the APO. Now, as you know, NCB Merchant Bank is run by the brother of the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry, Angus Young. And the employer of this gentleman is a gentleman who is known as one Mr. Michael Leachin. So there appears to be a connection between this individual, and I am asking the question, is there a link between the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy, and this gentleman called Mr. Michael Leachin that is leading to these decisions? Because I cannot see a gentleman with the integrity of Mr. Anthony Smart using his chairmanship to lend this kind of monies without any sense of security for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and investing $85 million on the basis of shares being held as collateral, knowing the volatility of the market. You need harder assets so that we can ensure if that company were to go belly up, Barita, we would be able to get back our investment. And if Cornerstone were to go belly up, we would get back our $85 million. So there appears to be maybe it's a mystery, maybe it is an area that requires deeper investigation, but there appears to be some linkage taking place. And we ask the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries to clear the air on this matter. It is of grave concern to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
MP Tanku, you spoke about the financial literacy survey by the central bank. Are you concerned that, given that the bank has found that almost a quarter of the population are struggling to get by, that this situation could possibly get worse if nothing is done about it? No.
The finding is actually 50% of the population that is struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. But this document, this survey, is actually relatively biased. It was not a survey it was a phone survey basically, but the survey does not truthfully reflect what we at constituency level are aware of. It does not truthfully reflect the high level of unemployment. It does not truthfully reflect the true level of poverty in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is in fact recognized that the survey is actually 1,000 plus persons, and Trinidad and Tobago has a population of 1.4 million persons. It is a snapshot, but we take it as an indicator. Perhaps what is worse is that no member of government, as at today's date, have commented on this fact, because these kinds of information, there's a serious shortage of data in this country, willingly or unwillingly, deliberately or not. There's a serious shortage of data, fact, especially current data. So when you have the central bank or any other entity doing a survey, this should have been used by the government to develop some sort of policy response to treat with the growing level of need for social support, for stronger safety nets. But that has not happened. No government member has spoken about these facts. There has been commentary here about the state of the business community, the state of confidence of the business community, in addition to the state of confidence of children, the state of children, and in addition to the state of homeowners and householders. But no government minister has commented on that, simply because the government is not, they're not here. They seem to be like the Prime Minister, they seem to be absent, or they simply do not care about the real situations facing this country. And as a result of that, because they have not done anything to treat with these or any of the information that came before, I fear that this will get substantially worse before the citizens remove this government and replace them with a caring government of the United National Congress.
MP, you spoke about job creation and the need for the government to increase revenue. What would be your suggestions regarding those matters?
What is required now is some sort of transformation of the economy. But that transformation tends to be a long-term process. So what I think a caring government needs to do now is to look at the assets that they have. Look at the resources that are immediately available to it now, and pursue those low-hanging fruit. Under our time, we did a national economic transformation plan based on some of the infrastructure that exists today. So if, for example, you want to see the best swimming pool in the country, you go to Cuba. We have the best cycling velodrome in the Caribbean. We have the best cricketing facilities in the Caribbean. We have the best football facilities, the best athletics arenas in the Caribbean. So sport tourism is a logical, easy, quick reach, low-hanging fruit. We also have the Children's Hospital. We have highly trained medical personnel here. So health tourism is another option. It's another low-hanging fruit. Entertainment. We have a significant entertainment population here. So even entertainment can generate quick employment, and that could stimulate the rest of the economy. There's educational opportunities. We had the campus down south. We have more educational facilities in Trinidad and Tobago than I think most of the other Caribbean islands. So even education, so sport tourism, health tourism, education, entertainment, those are 4 areas which have low-hanging fruit that can quickly be pursued to generate revenue, including foreign exchange, to generate jobs, to generate infrastructural development, to generate proposals and prospectus for growth. Those are just 4. But our National Transformation Plan has substantially more information, more possibilities that can be used to develop quick fixes, that this government doesn't have to wait to sit down to create another plan like they've done with their roadmap to recovery and the revised roadmap to recovery. There is already infrastructure in place that the government simply needs to access and put to good use. But they will not do it. They have not done it for the last 7 years, because a lot of that infrastructure, a lot of those directions, sport tourism, health tourism, etc., was developed and formulated and pursued by a Kamla Prasad Bisasa-led government. And therefore this government has chosen to leave those facilities abandoned, create sectors disinfect areas in our athletic arenas rather than create proper employment that could benefit the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
Lastly, MP, you were involved in a protest action last week in South because of bad roads and so on. Minister Rohan Sinanan has said that you are aware that work on the landslip that you are protesting about is awaiting a report from the Ministry of Local Government regarding a nearby structure, and that you're just playing politics on the matter. How do you respond?
All right, so this week we engaged in a discussion with some residents about some exceptionally bad road and a collapsed road in one part of my constituency. That is Pluck Road. That road is virtually impassable. We raised the issue with the ministry on a multiplicity of occasions. For the last 3 or 4 years, we have been raising these things with the Ministry of Works and with the Ministry of Local Government. The Ministry of Works is responsible for that area. So it is not a new problem, it's been there for at least 7 years. The minister claims that work is proposed to begin at that site, and that what is being awaited is a report from the Ministry of Local Government on a single house that is collapsing. And the Minister of Works and Transport is asking whether that structure, that single house, is to be determined a ruinous structure. Now, the minister, in his commentary on the newspapers yesterday and on the media, basically said that he is waiting on this report about this ruinous structure. If he had paid attention to the press conference that we had during that pouring rain when further collapse of the roadway took place, he would have heard us state clearly that the Ministry of Local Government came to the site, and while they were talking to the very same owner of the property that is collapsing, the same Ministry of Local Government had written to the Superior Regional Corporation to find out whether that same property that the Minister of Works and Transport is referring to is to be considered a ruinous structure. A ruinous structure, if the property was defined as a ruinous structure, it means that the ministry can instruct the homeowner to destroy it at his cost. He has nothing to get. When the minister now says that I know that the project has been waiting that, I think the minister is missing the truth. The fact of the matter is that on June 6th, 2022, the Superior Regional Corporation wrote to the Ministry of Local Government saying that this was not a ruinous structure. So if it takes 1 month for the minister to pick up the phone and speak to his colleague, that should not be why residents of Pluck Road or anywhere else should suffer. Perhaps what is of greater concern is, despite the fact that the Minister of the Keepback is now the Minister of Local Government, the same government to which the Minister of Works belongs to, the Minister of Works and Transport, the Honorable Rohan Sinanan, basically says, well, we have to now reconsider whether we are going to pursue along these lines. His government is at fault for not having fixed it in the first place. His government is at fault based on the report of the Superior Regional Corporation that was sent to the Ministry of Local Government. His government is at fault for the destruction of these people's homes as well. But the minister, instead of treating with the problem, instead of accepting the fact, and the documents were presented at that press conference, that there is no such thing as a ruinous structure there. That structure is damaged because of the Ministry of Works and Transport. Instead of treating with that, the minister closes his eyes to the truth and seeks to again blame us for raising the concerns of residents. I wish to remind Minister Rohan Sinanan that I am a representative. I am a representative of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and I was elected to that position. I wasn't selected like him. I was elected to that position, and I will do my job, I will do my responsibility, I will fulfill my obligations to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, no matter what Minister Rohan Sinanan says, no matter what he does, until he can get off his high horse, come down from there, Minister Sinanan, and do the job that taxpayers are paying you to do.
Before bringing our media conference to close, may I, on behalf of my colleague, the Honorable Dave Danko, reiterate the need for the government to outline and articulate its policy on share ownership, the FCB APO on a priority basis. We need clarification on this issue because it is inconsistent with previous government's policies on this issue of share ownership by the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to ask again whether individual employees of the First Citizens Bank, as builders of this great institution, will be given preferential treatment, or would they have to compete with individuals in the same bucket as we have outlined earlier, 55%. We also would like to know, when it comes to individual investors, without Trinidad and Tobago being associated after that term, would nationals of other CARICOM countries be involved? Would citizens of the UK be involved? Would citizens of the USA be involved? Would citizens of Canada be involved? Would they fall into this bucket? And would nationals have to compete with those non-nationals to secure shares? This is an area that we need clarification on. We need to know, are the registered mutual funds, would it include only those registered in Trinidad and Tobago, or would it also include mutual funds registered in other jurisdictions, whether it's Jamaica, Guyana, or Barbados? Would registered pensions and other trusts, including credit unions, refer to those registered only in Trinidad and Tobago, or would they include those registered in other jurisdictions? We need clarification on these matters. And why should the National Insurance Board be called upon by this allocation formula to compete with other national insurance schemes located in other countries? This is unacceptable. This is unfair, and the government needs to clear the air on this matter. And when we talk about other companies, in 2013, we were talking about other registered companies in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore we are asking, would this category would include registered companies outside of Trinidad and Tobago? Would it include foreign companies from whether Guyana, Barbados, Jamaica, or other companies from all over the world? These are issues that we need clarification on. And finally, this issue of Cornerstone Financial, we are calling on the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries to clear the air on whether there exists any relationship between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and this company called Cornerstone Financial Holdings Limited. And we want to know if there's any relationship between these gentlemen who I've just outlined and the gentleman who is the head of the NCB group called Mr. Michael Leachin. We cast no aspersions. We ask and we seek clarification on behalf of the citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So members of the media, thank you very much for taking part in this very important media conference today. We want to thank our honorable colleague, Dave Tanku, our shadow minister with responsibility for finance, for dealing with this issue of the free fall of our economy. And we look forward to you covering our Sunday media conference and our virtual report next Monday. Thank you, members of the media. Thank you, citizens of TNT. And